quick segment here on doing some rod repair. In this case, this rod got caught in the car door and we broke our tip off. No big deal, the rod is still good. We only lost a few inches of the tip and it was a pretty clean break, as you can see. But if it was, jagged as they often are, all I'm going to do is just take a file and just file that tip nice and flat. Or if it's really jagged and cracked unevenly, what I would do is take some masking tape and just wrap it around the tip and mark where the tip is actually whole again, where there's no more cracks going on the fiberglass or graphite. And I would take a thin saw and just cut that tip off where I know there's no more crack or weak spot from the break. So once we have that cleaned up, take my razor blade, again just like on a new rod, we go ahead and scuff where that tip is going to go. We want to get rid of all the old epoxy or any crud that might have got on our tip. So once that's clean, I already know what size this is, but if I didn't know, I'll take my tip gauge and just find the size that fits. It's like, see, it won't fit in a 4-5, and it fits nice and snug in a 5. So in that case, we need a size 5 tube. And this last guide here is a size 7. So I'm going to go with the size 6 here, a 6 ring. The 6 means the diameter of that ring right there. It's 6 millimeters to the outside of that ring from each side to the other. So double check it, make sure it's a nice fit, and it is. So all I'm going to do is take my tip top adhesive, insert it in the tube, and once it's seated in there, bend it off and just break it like that, leaving the adhesive inside the tube. A little bit hanging off the edge won't hurt you. If you wanted to, you could hit that with a razor blade. And once again, another handy application for our bubble buster. Go ahead and heat that up, if you can see it. You don't have to put it real close, you don't want to burn your hand. Just nice steady heat. You can see it warming up there. What I'm going to do is just take that tip top, press it on the blank, and rotate it as it goes down. Make sure it's good and seated all the way down. Try to line it up to the other guides. Let that cool and it'll be good to go. Next thing we do here, due to the break being a few inches down, now this tip, or this first guide is a little too close to my tip. I want to space this out. So all I'm going to do is, while I've got my alcohol burner going here, just lightly heat this wrap. You have to be kind of careful not to overheat it. Just a little bit of heat there. I'm going to take my razor blade and cut where I know the guide foot is. Cut into that wrap and up the guide foot. You can see that guide kind of just slid out of there. They don't always slide like that, but they'll let you trim up that guide foot. That'll allow you to cut the wrap off without cutting towards your blank. You don't want to cut into your graphite or fiberglass. That'll weaken it. So now we've got our guide out. The guide's still good, but we want to remove this wrap. So be real careful when you're trimming epoxy that's not against the guide foot. You don't want to dig in. Just go up and against it. A lot of times you can actually hold that thread and spin it out from under the epoxy. Again, always use your fingernail where you can. It won't hurt the blank at all. Just clean that up a little bit. You can see now it's like that guide was never there. So all we're going to do now is just take that guide that we removed from up top here, and I'm just going to just look at it, or you could even measure. And in this case, I'm just going to split the difference that's left here. As long as this distance right here is less than the difference here, or this gap, it's not going to look funny, or give us any kind of problems as far as the performance of the rod. So now we've moved the rod over here into our rod wrapper. I went ahead and wrapped the tip top. And when you're wrapping a tip top, you just wrap up to the base of the tip. There's no reason to wrap up on it. You can if you want to, but it just makes it easier. If you ever break that tip or a ring pops out, you can heat that tip right off, put a new one on. It's not an issue. Alright, so we're going to wrap our guide now, and I'm going to wrap it in this neon green so you can see it in the video. And I'm going to tape that thread against the blank in the direction that we're going to wrap. We're going to wrap from the guide foot up towards the guide. So we place the tape up here, and I'm going to just rotate the rod. If I'm using a hand wrapper, I'm just going to rotate the rod by hand. In this case, I'm using the power wrapper, so I'm just using the foot pedal to rotate the rod and bring my thread down about 3/16 of an inch below the guide foot. And then I'm going to rotate the rod and make those threads cross. I'm going to cross my thread back over itself to lock it on itself. So we come around in one revolution where we want to start our wrap, and then cross the thread. And you want to make sure you cross it at least 5 times. There's no reason not to do 6, 7, or 8, especially when you're just starting out. It's not going to hurt. Once you get that going, you can actually take your tape off. Take a razor blade, trim your tag. Doesn't have to be really close because you're going to wrap over the rest of it. I'm just keeping a nice steady pressure down and back so that thread seats against itself. Then I'm going to take my quick pull with the loop in the direction that we're wrapping. So again, we're wrapping towards the tip of the rod. So that's the direction my loop is going to go. That's the loop that we're going to actually pull under these next 5 or 6 wraps. So we're going to wrap over the loop at least 5 times. And then once we get toward the leg of the guide foot, starts angling up towards the guide, give myself some thread to work with. Go ahead and cut it. Take my thread, insert it into my loop, keeping tension on it at all times. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate the rod a little bit. I want to make sure where I pull it through is not against the guide foot. I want it to be purely against the blank. So you see right here, when I pull that, it's just going to slide up and under the other wraps, like so. And what I like to do is go ahead and trim this tag to make my life a little easier. That way there's less to pull through. Pull it through just like that. Take my thumbnail with the razor blade. Take the back edge of my razor blade or the back end of a brush, kind of smooth out my wraps. So all we're going to do is mix up some epoxy. We've got our flex coat syringes here. All I need is about 1 cc of each, so I'm just going to go ahead and nice and easy. Okay, so you can see now we've got a nice clear epoxy, no swirls in there. What you do see there is in the bottom of the cup, but there's no swirls actually in the epoxy. You can always check out moving it around and see if any of those swirls follow your brush or your mixing stick. In this case, we're good to go. So all I'm going to do is just apply a little bit of epoxy to my brush. Slowly just rotate the rod and let the epoxy just flow around the wrap. I'm not brushing the epoxy. I may dab it here or there, but you don't need to brush the epoxy everywhere. You just take your brush, let it touch the epoxy, and let the epoxy flow as you guide it around. You're more or less pushing the epoxy where it needs to go. You're not actually brushing it. So that's all there is to that wrap. all I would do is light my alcohol burner, or bubble buster in this case. It's got 92% alcohol in it, rubbing alcohol, and if I squeeze that, it just pushes the heat to the side, a nice firm point, nice sharp point. And if I had a bubble on there, I could just zap it with that heat without having to heat the whole wrap. You don't really want to heat the wrap because it makes the epoxy run. You can actually create bubbles or even burn your wraps. So just give it a once over. If you see any bubbles in there, hit them real quick with it, or if you see one in particular, hit it with a actual bubble buster by squeezing it a little bit. But other than that, that's all you need to repair a rod.